We are just 3 days away from the Iowa caucuses, the first state to have their say in the 2016 election. And voters there will have to decide what to make of Donald Trump's decision not to attend last night's GOP debate. So what was the event like without the frontrunner? Here are some highlights.
I will apologize to nobody for the vigorousness with which I will fight terrorism.
As already been pointed out, the only budget that Ted has ever voted for is a budget that Rand Paul sponsored that brags about cutting defense spending.
There's three lanes. There's the establishment lane, the anti-establishment lane, and then there's the Kasich lane.
I am not the candidate of career politicians in Washington.
We need people who think out of the box and can solve problems.
I do not support blanket amnesty. I do not support amnesty.
You said more than that, sir.
No, I said I do not support blanket legalization.
You said earned path to citizenship is basically code for amnesty. You supported earned path to citizenship.
It absolutely has been. We are not going to round up and deport 12 million people, but we're not going to go around handing out citizenship cards either.
He led the charge to finally fix this immigration problem that has existed now for, as Marco says, for 30 years. And then he cut and run. I wrote a book about this called Immigration Wars. You can get it at $2.99 on Amazon.
That is the book where you changed your position on immigration, because you used to support a path to citizenship.
So did you.
Well, but you changed in the book.
So did you, Marco.
When Senator Rubio proposed that bill creating a path to citizenship, you proposed an amendment. It would have allowed for legalization, but not citizenship. Yes, it would.
The amendment you're talking about is one sentence. It's 38 words. It didn't say a word about legalization.
But the bill allowed both. The bill you were amending allowed citizenship and legalization.
But Megan,
he is the king of saying, oh, you're for amnesty. Everybody's for amnesty except for Ted Cruz. But it's a falseness.
This is the lie that Ted's campaign is built on, and Rand touched upon it. That he's the most conservative guy and everyone else is a rhino. The truth is, Ted, throughout this campaign, you've been willing to say or do anything in order to get votes.
I heard what they both said. I saw it on the video. Ted could change his mind. Marco could change his mind. It's perfectly legal in this country to change your mind. But when you're a governor, you have to admit it. You can't hide behind parliamentary tricks.
Joining us now is roll call columnist Jonathan Allen and politics reporter for the Daily Beast, Betsy Woodruff, both of them in Washington. Thank you both for joining us this afternoon. Jonathan, let's start with you. Did Trump's absence last night help other GOP candidates, or did it hurt them? For example, did Ted Cruz get hammered more because Trump wasn't there?
I think that's absolutely part of Trump's calculation there, is that the number two guy becomes the focal point, the number two guy in polling, that is Ted Cruz. I think there was an effort to beat up on Ted Cruz. I think the consensus from analysts is that he did emerge weakened from the debate yesterday, but I didn't think it was as bad as it could have been. I mean, the beatings that get handed down by Donald Trump at debates are much worse than anything Ted Cruz suffered last night. I think there were some opportunities there and some missed opportunities for candidates to gain a little bit of traction. I think we'll have to see what happens on Monday and beyond to know what the full effect is.
Betsy, did any of the Republicans steal the show last night? Anyone have a defining moment?
Kind of the unusualness about this debate was that didn't happen. The defining moment was that there was none. I think rather maybe there was an issue that was sort of central, and that, of course, was immigration. This Republican primary is practically, for all practical purposes, a single issue contest. Every single debate, a significant portion of the ads, immigration is the focal point. And it's fascinating watching these guys going back and forth, trying to suss out who's changed their position, who's changed their goals, when the reality is Republican primary voters are most excited about the one guy who wasn't there, because regardless of whether or not Trump's policies are a good idea, they're easy to understand, which of course isn't the case with Cruz and Rubio.
So I want to look ahead. We're 72 hours from the Iowa caucuses. How do Monday night's results shape the rest of the race going forward, Jonathan?
I think the real big question here is going to be where Marco Rubio finishes. He's expected to finish third, but not just where he finishes, by what kind of a margin. If there's a huge distance between Marco Rubio and the rest of the pack, you might be looking at three tickets out of Iowa, so to speak: Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio. If it's a little bit more bunched up, you could see a couple other candidates making a case for themselves and to their donors and to other Republicans that they ought to get another look. So you could, if it's bunched up, see maybe 4 or 5 people still viable by New Hampshire.
So, Betsy, at what point do we start to see these candidates dropping out? At what point do they start to feel the pressure from establishment Republicans to withdraw so that a third and fourth place, maybe fifth place candidate can start to gain momentum?
I think there's going to be a mass purging after the New Hampshire primary. Now, after the Iowa caucuses, most people are expecting that Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee will drop out, and their endorsements will actually be fairly coveted because even though voters didn't want them as the nominee, they're well known in the Republican base, they're popular. So we should expect to see those guys just sort of vaporize, unless, of course, they have surprisingly well showings on Monday. After New Hampshire, of course, it's going to be a different story. There are so many establishment candidates competing for a finite number of sympathetic votes that unless someone does really well, unless someone's cracking 7 or 8% at the very least, I think we're going to see a lot of these guys just throw in the towel.
And Jonathan, your thoughts on that?
Actually, I had a little bit of trouble hearing that in the earpiece here. So, if you could.
Sure, no problem. At what point do candidates who do poorly in Iowa and maybe New Hampshire, at what point do they start to feel pressure from the Republican establishment to withdraw from the race so the third and fourth place candidates can start to gain momentum and that there's opposition, there's a chance against a Ted Cruz or a Donald Trump?
Well, I think they've been feeling it already. Certainly some of the candidates have been getting pressure, both public and private, to think about how long they can stay in this race and the damage that they might be doing to the prospects of defeating Trump or Cruz, which I think a lot of people in the Republican establishment would like to see happen. But the truth is, most of them will go to New Hampshire. It's not very expensive to campaign in New Hampshire. It's a pretty small state. You're only there for a week. I think that you might start to see people really dropping out between New Hampshire and South Carolina as they run out of money, and perhaps some of that money and support starts to consolidate around one of the so-called establishment lane candidates. That said, if you look at the polling for Donald Trump, he's way ahead of Ted Cruz, and if you look at the polling for the two of them, it's hard to see right now where another candidate comes in and eats their lunch.
Jeb Bush branded the establishment candidate once again last night because of his dad and his brother. How did he do last night, and how long does he hang on if his numbers don't improve? Does he stay in the race until Florida, Jonathan? Or, I'm sorry, go ahead, Betsy.
I thought he had a pretty decent night. He seemed a little bit peppier, a little more energetic than we've seen in some other debates. And watching him go after Rubio on immigration was really interesting. Now, Jeb, unlike a number of these candidates, has been pretty rigidly consistent as far as his immigration views. Those views, of course, are very unpopular with the Republican Party base. But seeing him chastise Rubio for not staying the course on the gang-made immigration bill, I thought was really interesting. It's not necessarily a line of attack that's going to help Jeb out that much, especially with Trump voters and Cruz voters, but it showed kind of a consistency and a commitment that I think a lot of voters might respect.
Jonathan, what do you think? If Jeb's numbers don't improve, if he doesn't start to show a little bit more strength, how long does he hang on?
I mean, he's got a ton of money, so he can hang on as long as he wants. The question is, how long does he want to continue to damage the family brand and to damage himself if he doesn't really see a chance, really see a path to winning this nomination? It would be insane to spend the kind of money he has and not at least see what the Iowa caucus goers have to say. The word on the ground there is that he's got a pretty strong organization. Perhaps if he's lucky and good, he gets a little bit of a bounce out of Iowa. Maybe he does a little better than expected. New Hampshire might be a reasonably good state for him if he gets some momentum out of Iowa. So I think he'll take a hard look after New Hampshire at what the prospects are for really getting into the race at a top tier. But we haven't seen him gain any traction yet at all. If anything, he's really been mired in the territory of also-rans.
Okay, and Betsy, let's talk about Kasich. At what point does someone like him make the decision to drop out of the race to help members of the party?
Well, he said, I think it was last week, that if he really gets shellacked in New Hampshire, he's going to call it a day. He pretty much has all his eggs in the New Hampshire basket. If he doesn't have, I would guess, at least a top 4 showing there, then it's going to be very difficult for him to make the case elsewhere that he's competitive and that he can unite sort of all the voters that fall in this moderate category that are looking for someone moderate to support them. That said, there's always been a rumor a little bit that Kasich is more focused on potentially being a vice presidential nominee than actually winning the nomination. election. I don't know if that's true. Of course, his campaign hasn't confirmed that. But if you look at the way he presents himself in the debates, the way he's marketing himself, he is essentially creating someone who would be at the top of the list for whoever the potential next nominee is. Moderate, but not in a way that's wishy-washy. Aggressive, but not meanly so. So regardless of how well he does in New Hampshire, as long as he doesn't have some career-damaging gaffe, which of course didn't happen last night, I think things are going to be good for him going forward.